Today we'll be talking a little bit about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, their similarities, their differences, and how both correlate to our environment. First up, we're going to be talking about photosynthesis, which there's actually two types. One is oxygenic photosynthesis and one is anoxygenic photosynthesis. Both follow very similar principles, but whenever you hear someone speaking about photosynthesis, you're talking mainly about oxygenic photosynthesis. During that process, light energy transfers electrons from water taken up by plant roots to CO2 to produce carbohydrates. In this transfer, the CO2 is reduced or received when the water is oxidized, or that just means it loses electrons. Oxygen is then produced with carbohydrates, and photosynthesis functions as a counterbalance to the respiration by taking in CO2 and putting out oxygen back into the atmosphere. As you see here in my very, very horridly done drawing, I'm still learning to use the Apple Pencil. I detailed this process here on the left. So, sun comes down, gives the plants energy, heat energy, and then combine that with water, the plants grow, they throw off oxygen and take in CO2. Now, coming here to our secondary, in anoxygenic photosynthesis, meanwhile, there's use of electron donors that are not water and do not produce oxygen according to anoxygenic photosynthetic bacteria by Libra texts. The process typically occurs in bacteria such as green sulfur bacteria and phototropic purple bacteria. The oxygenic photosynthesis equation basically breaks down to 6 CO2 plus 12 H2O plus light energy, and then the products given out by that on the other end is 6H12O6 plus 6O2 plus 6H2O. In that equation, you see 6 of the carbon dioxide molecules combined with 12 molecules of water using energy. The end result is the formation of a single carbohydrate molecule, 6H12O6, or glucose, along with the 6 molecules each of oxygen and water. Now, moving on here to cellular respiration. Many of you probably have already seen a form of cellular respiration and not realize this. Whenever you make bread. Because going back to my drawing here on the other side, you have your water, your yeast, your water, your yeast, those get poured into the bowl, and then your sugar here on the right. Whenever yeast, sugar, and water are all introduced, the yeast eats the sugar to form carbohydrates, and those holes you always see in bread, those are actually the byproducts of waste whenever cellular respiration happens. So, come on. There's actually 3 main steps of cellular respiration. The first being glycolysis, the citric acid, or the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, where oxidative photosynthylation occurs. Yes, I know, it's a mouthful. The TCA cycle and the oxidative photosynthylation require oxygen, while glycolysis can occur in anaerobic conditions, meaning where there's very little oxygen. Glycolysis is actually the initial breakdown of glucose to pyruvate, a 3-carbon structure. The pyruvate moves into the mitochondrial matrix, where a transition step called pyruvate oxidation takes place. In the process, pyruvate dehydrogenase converts the 3-carbon, you know what, let's move on down here instead of me trying to do that. The final step is pretty simple here. The electron transport chain is a series of redox reactions powered by high-energy electrons that pumps protons across the membrane, creating a proton gradient. Together with an electrochemical gradient is created. At the end of the electron transport chain, the final electron acceptor O2, oxygen, combines with protons to produce water, or H2O. Meanwhile, ATP synthase uses the movement of protons back into the mitochondrial matrix for ATP synthesis. As I stated earlier, one of the examples of cellular respiration, when you're making bread, sugar, water, flour, and yeast are introduced, and the yeast kicks off cellular respiration by eating the sugar in bread. When ridding itself of the waste created during the process, that's how holes in bread are formed. Sorry if I went a little overboard, but I'm also having problems seeing out of my one eye, thanks to the contact lens. Anyway, thanks for being so patient.